and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. President Trump hints at progress on the US-backed peace plan to end the Russia-Ukraine war following talks in Geneva at the weekend. Israel kills a top Hezbollah commander during a strike on Beirut, despite a US-brokered ceasefire being in place. Italian prosecutors probe sniper tourists during the 90s Sarajevo siege, following explosive allegations against the Serbian president. President Trump has hinted that progress is potentially being made on the US-backed peace plan to end the Russia-Ukraine war. He said something big may be happening following talks between the US and Ukraine in Geneva this weekend. Meanwhile, President Zelensky has said giving Ukrainian territory to Russia is the main problem. For more on this, I'm joined by Jason Osborne, former senior advisor to Trump during his 2016 campaign. Jason, brilliant to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Let's just start.
Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. Let's start. Basically, it's been a really busy few days of diplomacy, and we've seen that between the European, Ukrainian, and US authorities. President Trump has teased big progress. Is something good actually going to come of this?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, this is 4 years in, going on 4 years, right, that we've been in this conflict. So as I understand it, there was a 28-point plan that seems to be controversial in terms of whose plan it was. Now that got whittled down to 19 that the Europeans countered with. And then as I understand it, about 45 minutes ago, it's down to 7 points, really, with some serious negotiations moving forward on kind of the hard points, which is, the territory issues, the NATO, what that means, and then the recovery and rebuild. So I think that something as good is going to come out of this, but you never know on both sides. They're pretty alpha and making sure that they don't lose face, I guess, so to speak.
And it's really interesting because cautious optimism seems to be the word here. But I want to pick up on something you said to me there. How did Ukraine's peace plan actually come about? Whose plan is it? Is it Russia's or is it America's? And does it sell Ukraine down the river? Because this has been the massive questions that have been asked since this 28-point plan was revealed. And we know at the heart of it is Steve Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev, and neither of these two men are actually diplomats.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I am confused about that aspect, the initial plan, right? I know that once that came out, then, Secretary of State Rubio hot-footed it over to Europe, sat down. I think they came to a resolution that, the 28-point plan just wasn't going to work, that they needed to really sit down at the table and figure out what are the core issues here that we have to figure out, that we have to agree on. Clearly, the territory issue is a big one. This ongoing security of Ukraine is another big one. But ultimately, I think this came down to, Donald Trump saying, you have until Thursday, Thanksgiving Day here in America, to come to an agreement. And if not, then, we have to make our decision as the U.S. on where we go from here. And so putting that deadline on it really kind of put everybody in the same room and said, all right, let's get down to the nitty gritty here. Let's figure out what it is that we can each cede to the other. And then let's rebuild Ukraine and hopefully, keep peace in the future. So.
And that's really interesting because we are back to the same old routine. Let's point that out in these peace talks with Ukraine, saying giving up territory to Russia is the main problem. How can President Trump expect Ukraine to give up land they still defend to Russia. And this has been the problem throughout. And we also saw that in that explosive Oval Office meeting between Zelensky and President Donald Trump. Donald Trump has really flip-flopped between supporting Russia and then supporting Ukraine and then supporting Russia and supporting Ukraine. So my question to you is, why does this seem so confusing at the moment? Does Donald Trump actually know what the main aim here is and how he can make sure that these peace plan does work?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is a confusion also on where Ukraine is and where Russia is, right? And I don't think either side has been really gotten down to where the line's drawn. As I understand it, the agreement seems to be going towards letting Russia keep some of the areas that they currently occupy. And while Russia had wanted to add in additional territory that they don't currently control, Ukraine was again drawing a line in the sand, which, obviously is their right. But also it's the concept of, do you cede too much now? And then Russia in a few years decides, hey, we can get even more. We'll just do it again once we rebuild. And that's the concern the Ukrainians have, is I don't know how strong they are. The Ukraine side is, in how buried in they are on making sure they get back land that they have already lost. And that remains to be seen in these negotiations. But I think if we can get some of the security guarantees moving forward, not necessarily NATO membership, but at least Article 5 protection, then maybe Ukraine feels a little bit better about it. And then obviously the U.S. is going to try and get some of the money, recoup some of the money they've invested already, as well as the Europeans. So I think we are moving in the right direction, but this is no different, I think, in many ways from a conceptual standpoint of the issues that we've had in the Middle East in terms of peace in Israel, et cetera, that it is multi-year, multi-decade and generational struggles, and you just have to keep on top of it.
And it's really difficult because you said when it comes to land, you were talking about Ukraine worrying that Russia could maybe rearm and carry on its effort to take more land in Ukraine. But that's also a big worry for the Europeans. And they have seen Russian aggression in their airspace and in various different areas. But Jason, my question to you is, why is all the pressure being applied to Ukraine and not to Russia? And is President Trump just doing this to win back support at home? Because his polling hasn't been very good lately, and he's come against some really difficult things to deal with domestically. The Epstein files, Marjorie Taylor Greene, things aren't going his way.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your first point, I think you have to look at, I wouldn't say it's pressure on Ukraine and no pressure on Russia. Russia certainly has had its share of pressure. They aren't, I guess, as expressive about the pressure. They act like that the sanctions aren't having an impact, that the not being a part of G8 isn't having an impact, but it is. It's clear that it is if Russia is actually still at the table. And Ukraine, I think, from the standpoint that Ukraine and the U.S. Trump's job right now is to try and end the conflict and get us out of the region and focus back on home. And so that's where the pressure point is to finally say to Ukraine, all right, do you agree with this? And then the collective will of Ukraine and the Europeans, the U.S. to push pressure on Russia to accept it, I think becomes greater. In terms of back home and sort of the pressures that Trump is having, yeah, there's no question. I mean, we're in kind of the silly season of politics. We're a year out from, the midterm elections. There's a lot of things that need to go well in the coming months. But in terms of what Trump has done since he's been in office is exactly what he campaigned and said he was going to do. And so he is focusing on trying to fix the economy, get it back moving in the right direction. Some of the noise that some of the members of Congress and Marjorie Taylor Greene dropping out, I mean, it's only expected to have certain fissures within the party moving forward. But I think he recovers from it well. And we start the new year, hopefully with a peace plan and the economy back on the right track.
Jason Osborne, I think a lot of us hope that we'll start the new year with a peace plan. Thank you so much for your time. Great to speak to you.
Thank you.
Let's continue this conversation with defense and security analyst Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a lot of diplomacy happening, but we have heard from the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and he says two words matter most in peace talks: just and lasting. We know the UK is set to hold a coalition of the willing call tomorrow. But will anything meaningful come from these talks? Because they've had so many talks about talks.
Well, good evening. Yes, it's interesting you use that word diplomacy. Diplomacy isn't what I would call that's been coming out of America recently. The world is certainly very unstable. It's getting worse. It's getting more dangerous. And that's in part thanks to what Russia is doing in Eastern Europe. And it's frankly bewildering to sit on this side of the Atlantic and see America's solution is to threaten Ukraine, our ally, with an ultimatum. This 28-point pro-Russian plan that Kyiv has had no say in crafting, or America walks away. And when you strip away those 28 points, and it comes down to three things, really. It's Ukraine's security, which would deliberately be downgraded, long-range missiles removed, foreign troops barred, not even able to join NATO. And the second aspect is that it would cede land, not just the territory it's lost already, but also further lands that Russia doesn't even own now. And then finally, Russia is expected, I should say, not obliged, not to invade neighboring countries, and NATO would not be allowed to expand further. It really is baffling capital cities, everybody here in Europe, as to why America would promote such a capitulation, if you like. So it's no surprise that voices have come together, this coalition of the willing that you spoke of, to say, we've got to try something else, because this isn't going to be long lasting. It won't be secure. It's not in Ukraine's interests. It's not in Europe's interests. And it's not in America's interests either, because if Europe is distracted, America might need help 5-10 years down the line. And if we're busy still dealing with Russia, we won't be there to help America.
Tobias, it's really interesting because I think a lot of the conversation that's been happening since we all saw this 28-point plan that did come out is, how did Ukraine's peace plan come about? Whose plan was it? Was it the Russians? Was it the Americans? And there even seems to be confusion in Europe where this original draft came from. And many people say it just basically sells Ukraine down the river. And why do you think the Europeans were iced out and Donald Trump just went ahead with this method? Do you think he's just desperate to get this war over? Or is there something deeper to that?
Well, I think it's two things that you just touched on there. Firstly, wanting to get this war over. He's clearly frustrated, Donald Trump, that he's not been able to conclude it. I remember all those big promises prior to him getting elected. Where did this come from? Well, I understand, but it's yet to be confirmed that this was an agreement between Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev, his Russian counterpart. Many say that it's actually just a copy of what Russia's requests have been. But ultimately, as the UK Prime Minister has hinted at, it isn't lasting peace. It would provide a lull in activity, maybe even a ceasefire, but it doesn't address the long-term objectives of what Putin is trying to achieve. And that's greater control in Eastern Europe, to create a buffer, if you like, from growing prosperity that we see in the EU, in Eastern Europe particularly, because Putin doesn't want his own nation, his own people, to see what a thriving economy actually looks like. So he needs Belarus there. He needs a failing Ukraine there as well. So this put all together leads to a wider challenge that we're seeing, a geopolitical challenge of our global order crumbling, of Russia and China aligning themselves to challenge our global order. And that's the bigger concern, that America seems to be backing away from any interest in supporting international governance and rule of law.
And Tobias, the Defence Committee over in the UK says the UK must reject Russian calls for Ukraine to give up land. And you obviously agree with that, just from the conversation we've been having. I'm suggesting you do, but I hope you do. But what can the UK and Europe realistically do to prevent this from happening? Because if the US backs this plan and Ukraine is backed into a wall and signs it, that's the concern. Could Russia rearm, reinvade, and what does that mean? Is there any way anyone can stop this at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, you summarize the dilemma that we've been facing since Donald Trump got elected. We've been very patient with this American president that's wanted to court President Putin, bring him in from the cold, trust the Kremlin that they would honor a deal. We've known all the time that this was never going to happen. We've been waiting for America to catch up. And then you now pose this very important question. Well, if America does walk away, if Trump says, I've had enough, I don't want anything to do with this, we are left alone. And perhaps that's where Europe needs to look at itself, because collectively we are powerful militarily. Certainly we could have imposed secondary sanctions ourselves as a European bloc. We could have actually got hold of those frozen assets. Easily done, but we blinked at that moment when it was discussed only a few weeks ago. So there are absolutely ways that we can place greater pressure on Russia's finances, greater pressure on the battlefield as well, to finally give the lethality that Ukraine is asking for to be able to hit targets at range in Russia. These are all things that Europe could do alone. We don't need America for that, but America and Europe on the same page absolutely makes more sense, which is why so much effort has been made to stay close to Donald Trump. But maybe that point is coming where there's this split.
And it's really interesting because many people I've spoken to have been very critical about Europe and how they haven't acted quick enough when it comes to Ukraine. And it always seems to be a lot of talks and actually not enough action. But I want to ask you about the Kremlin, because we actually have heard from Russia, and they say the European counter-proposal for the Ukraine peace does not work for Russia, but the plan sent to Kyiv last week seems acceptable. I mean, this is no surprise. Russia obviously preferred the first plan that came out. But do you think Donald Trump will start putting pressure on Russia now to get this over the line? And maybe he's been watching the mood music and seen the backlash to the original plan.
Yeah, well, perhaps this is the difference between the art of statecraft today and what it was in the past. You could never imagine Kissinger or Richard Holbrooke or Jimmy Carter acting in this way. These should be the behind the scenes, the back channels that take place to bridge the considerable void that you've just outlined between the Russian position and the Ukrainian position. But when America teams up with Russia to then present a fait accompli, no wonder Europe is then saying, no, we cannot agree to this, in part because Russia is already at war with the rest of Europe, not just Ukraine. There is a gray zone war, which we've discussed in the past. There are daily attempts to clip the undersea cables. There's coercion taking place, disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks every single day. This is what Russia does. And unless you stand up to the bully, it will continue doing continuing its aggression. And that perhaps is the piece that America, particularly Donald Trump, does not understand.
Yes, Tobias, thank you so much. Very interesting to speak to you. Tobias Ellwood there. Thank you as always. Israel has killed a senior Hezbollah commander in a airstrike on Beirut's southern suburbs, despite a US and French brokered ceasefire. Hezbollah confirmed the death of its second-in-command, calling the attack a red line, while Lebanon says at least 5 people were killed and dozens wounded. For more on this, I'm joined from Beirut by retired Brigadier General Khalil Helou, Professor of Geopolitics. Brigadier General, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time.
The pleasure is mine.
I just want to start by asking you, Israel has hit Beirut for the first time in months without issuing a warning, killing Hezbollah's chief of staff. How is Hezbollah going to respond to this?
Well, the alternatives of Hezbollah are very limited. In fact, in theory, you have a lot of alternatives. Either targeting Israel from the Lebanese territory, or using the Syrian territory, or using even Yemen. And in that case, Iran should be okay with it. Or carry out operations outside the Middle East against Israeli diplomatic delegations. But all these alternatives are theoretical. In fact, Hezbollah has a very narrow margin of maneuver because they know very well in the Hezbollah command, if whatever they do, even from Lebanon or from anywhere in the Middle East or out in the world, Israel will retaliate harshly. And we are expecting in the forthcoming weeks an escalation, a huge escalation of bombing over Israel, over Hezbollah operatives and Hezbollah positions in Lebanon. The reason is very simple. It's not a matter of an issue or of Hezbollah leader or Hezbollah military commander. In fact, the killed person, Tabatabai, is the chief of staff of Hezbollah. He's the #1 military officer. And of course, this will undermine the chain of command and control within Hezbollah. And it will create a moral strike. But the problem is not there. The problem is that Israel has a very clear strategy in Lebanon. Israel in the past was concerned about the security of the northern cities and villages in Israel. But at this time, it's not, the issue is not there. They already made deals with Hezbollah. The first one was in 2000. The second one was in 2006. And these deals were not met by Hezbollah. Hezbollah always got profit of the truce, of the ceasefire, in order to rearm and reorganize.
Brigadier,
Is proposed.
oh, sorry. I just wanted to butt in there. I do apologize. I wanted to ask you a question about the escalation, because you said an escalation could be coming, and that's what Lebanon could be expecting from Israel. In that case, do you think the US is doing enough to restrain Israel from attacking Lebanon nearly a year after the ceasefire came into place?
Now, the problem there is that the Lebanese government and the Lebanese presidents, since the beginning of the year, were asking the international community, and particularly Washington, to press Israel to restrain and to have patience, because the implementation of the 1701 resolution of Council of Security will be implemented, but Lebanese government needs time. Why? Because in the Lebanese government there is a division. The Hezbollah has 2 ministers there, and his ally, the Amal movement, has 2 other ministers. And these ministers, they refuse to disarm Hezbollah, even though the president and the prime minister mentioned that or took the decision to disarm Hezbollah and to have the monopoly of the use of force and the sovereignty of the state. But despite this, Hezbollah is maneuvering. In the first beginning, they accepted to implement the 1701 resolution. But after that, they started to get away of it, or to get back, to have stepped back from it, saying that they are a resistance, they don't accept to withdraw weapons, and so on. So the problem is within the Lebanese government, not in the Lebanese armed forces. The Lebanese armed forces are doing their duty perfectly. In the south of the Litani, they underwent 1,500 successful missions, and the American officer of the mechanism that is responsible to implement the 1701, he testified that the Lebanese army is doing well. And even Donald Trump freed $190 million in the U.S. military budget that was planned by the Biden administration and then freezed by Donald Trump. This $190 million for the Lebanese army has been freed a few weeks ago because the army is doing well.
Oh, just want to ask you something about the Lebanese armed forces at the moment. So we're talking about a possible escalation with Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. If this does happen, is the Lebanese armed forces ready? And are they strong enough to counter an Israeli attack? Or do the Lebanese armed forces need Hezbollah military support?
It is out of question to have a common military coordination between Hezbollah and the Lebanese armed forces toward Israel. The reason is very simple. The Lebanese armed forces, they follow the policy of the government, the official policy of the government. The official policy of the government is to implement the 1701 resolution that stipulates to a ceasefire and to have the Lebanese state should have the monopoly of the use of force and should gather or take by peace or not peace the armament of Hezbollah. So the Lebanese armed forces are in a situation of truce with Israel. Either the 1949 truce memorandum or the 1701. So it's out of question to have a war with Israel. Now, if Israel attacks directly the Lebanese armed forces positions, okay, they will retaliate. But talking about a strategy to be built between Hezbollah and the Lebanese armed forces, this is out of question, because the Lebanese armed forces are securing the positions of Hezbollah in South Lebanon. Already they secured more than 500 positions where Hezbollah was stationed, and now these positions are in the hands of the Lebanese armed forces. And now what the Lebanese armed forces could do is try to contain the situation, meaning that they should prove, but this is the government issue, they should prove that they are able to implement the UN resolution on their own without Israeli intervention. This is the issue. The issue is not to open a new war with Israel.
Khalil Helou, thank you so much for joining me and for your analysis. Milan prosecutors are stepping up their probe into foreigners who allegedly paid to shoot civilians during the Sarajevo siege in the 90s. The case now includes accusations against the Serbian president, Aleksandar Vučić. Wealthy foreigners who are believed to have been involved in so-called sniper tourism are also under investigation after new evidence has come to light. For more on this, I'm joined from Rome by journalist Alina Trabattoni. Alina, thank you so much for joining me. Alina, why has the scandal surrounding alleged human safaris during the siege of Sarajevo come back into the news headlines? Because there's been rumours about it for decades.
Well, yes, absolutely. It is quite concerning that, given that these rumors have been circulating for so many years, it's 30 years now since the Yugoslav war ended, that no investigation was carried out in the past. And this point precisely was one of the main points made at a press conference that was held today by writer and journalist Enzo Gavazzani, who has triggered this investigation, which started a few weeks ago in Rome. And as you mentioned, it's been out there for a while. There's been a documentary on this alleged terrifying practice. The Sarajevo safari documentary, it didn't actually get that wide circulation. There's been books on this terrible phenomenon, books in Italy, both fact and fiction, but for some reason, documentation and proof and of course testimony has always lagged behind these books and these documentaries and so forth. And so no actual investigation ever started until Gavazzani's recent criminal filing revived the issue. And international law experts and analysts especially stressed to me that now only with cross-border cooperation, especially between Milan prosecutors that are very actively taking on the case, politicians locally, survivor groups, militias, even people that were perhaps present in many of the alleged places where the alleged sniper tourism took place and saw what did or didn't happen. Only if this occurs will we be able to actually determine once and for all what actually happened back then. The investigation, though, in itself is very, very complicated because not just 30 years have gone by, but also in a current war scenario, it's next to impossible to say who shot which bullet in a situation where there's snipers shooting left, right, and center.
Alina, and that was my question to you, because if we look back between 1992 and 1996, more than 10,000 people were killed in Sarajevo. And the scenes coming out and the stories coming out of that moment are absolutely horrific. But how difficult will it be to prove these accusations against Serbia's current president and the tourists involved? How much information is there for lawyers to prosecute?
Well, that's very interesting. That's a very important point. What I can say, and I'd like to point out that the filing in relation to the Serbian president only took place after the investigation started, so it didn't trigger it. But generally, investigators will need some concrete indication of facts, whether they're confirmed or not. That's their job to then pursue. But they need places, dates, testimonies, and some concrete elements in order to open up an investigation. So presumably what the Italian writer and a journalist filed with the prosecutors convinced them was solid enough to open an investigation up into it. Today at the press conference in Rome, he said that despite the many leaks that there have been in the Italian press, and we've had lots of leaks in the Italian press that has then been picked up by the international press, including nationalities of people that were allegedly involved, including the payments that were made for each individual trip. But the Italian writer and journalist Gavazzani said that only some 15% of what was in his original filing and what investigators are looking at is actually known to the wider public. And he did give some other details. It wasn't just a weekend or two. It was most weekends between 1993 and the spring of 1996, when the war ended, that this phenomenon was identified by people. And his filing was based on testimony, he said. And he also said that allegedly nationals from most developed countries were involved and participated, and also gave some background in terms of many of them being actual hunters, as in for sports. But again, it's very, very difficult to imagine where this investigation will take. Given the horrifying nature of the phenomenon, but the only hope is that the prosecutors do get to the bottom of it.
Alina, it's a truly horrifying story, and when you tell me what the Italian journalist has been saying in the press conference, it really brings home what could have actually happened in Sarajevo. But just a final thought from you. Sorry, we don't have much time left. We know Italy is now having an investigation. Do you think that other countries are going to get on board with this, like the US, Canada, and Russia, who have apparently been involved in this?
Well, from what Gavazzani said at the press conference, people are starting to be called in for information in Sarajevo. Now, I have not verified that, but you'd presume that given that it's the city that's at the core of this investigation, that they will be initiating some sort of quest for information as well, with the opening up of the Milan investigation. And there are a lot of journalists covering this story. But aside from that, you would imagine that if certain countries are named, and there are some names that were leaked into the Italian press, into some of the main newspapers in Italy, in terms of countries, and this is including La Repubblica newspaper, which is one of the leading newspapers here in Italy. You would imagine that authorities there in those countries would want to look into the matter, if anything, to determine that, what happened at that time and place, and who left across the borders. Presumably there will be border information out of Italy. Trieste, which is the northeastern city bordering with Eastern Europe, was purportedly, allegedly, I keep using the term allegedly because obviously this is just an investigation, and no wrongdoing has been proven, but the city of Trieste is the one where these groups were taken into Bosnia from via van or plane in some instances.
Alina Trabattoni, thank you so much for bringing us the latest on that story. Now, Australians are bracing for a social media ban for under-16s that's due to take effect next month. The government says the measure aims to reduce pressures and risks on kids exposed to content that can harm their health and well-being. But content creators and businesses that rely on social media are concerned over the impact it may actually have. Patrick Falk reports.
For many food stall vendors in Australia, social media marketing is all part of the hustle. As Demi Herrick Slim dishes up his family's signature chicken noodles, his phone captures the routine for his followers on platforms like Instagram and TikTok.
They can connect with me personally. It's building the personal branding, and they can come visit me here and there. I can build a community, hopefully, one day.
But at just 15 years of age, Australia's incoming social media restrictions are going to put a stop to that, at least for now. Under the new rules, under-16s can't set up accounts on social media platforms. Existing ones will need to be deactivated or removed.
I just feel bad for the young generations, the one that actually want to do something great on social media. They're going to get held back for a bit here and there.
Social media companies are responsible for enforcing the rules. They face fines of up to about $30 million for serious or repeated breaches. Australia's social media industry is estimated to generate about $6 billion a year. Stakeholders say it's likely to result in a drop in advertisers and revenue. Reports say some content creators are planning to move abroad. Children's musicians Tina and Mark Harris, whose La La YouTube channel has 1.4 million subscribers, say any negative impact on income is going to hurt.
We don't know. We don't know what December 10 really means. I think for us in the preschool space, a lot of parents, children are watching on their parents' accounts.
We live in a world where the digital landscape is real, and it's a place where kids love to play. It doesn't have to be a harmful space if it's regulated well. And I think this attempt at regulation is just doesn't fit well.
Australia's Communications Minister has conceded the ban may not be perfect. Some say educating children about how to navigate social media safely would be more effective. How it plays out will be critical for other countries considering the same. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya English.
Brave and strong.
A reminder of our top stories. President Trump hints at progress on the US-backed peace plan to end the Russia-Ukraine war following talks in Geneva over the weekend. Israel kills a top Hezbollah commander during a strike on Beirut, despite a US-brokered ceasefire being in place. Italian prosecutors probe sniper tourists during the 90s Sarajevo siege following explosive allegations against the Serbian president. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. The Rail Deal with Tom Burgess-Watson will be coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.